Our Lady of the Flowers by Genet, page 95. Darling loves her man. She bakes pies for him and butters his roasts. She even dreams of him if he is in the toilet. She worships him in any and all positions. A silent key is opening the door, and the wall bursts just as the sky tears apart to reveal the man, like the one Michelangelo painted nude in The Last Judgment. When the door has been closed as gently as if it were made of glass, Darling tosses his hat on the couch and his cigarette butt any old place, though preferably to the ceiling. Divine leaps to the assault, clings to her man, licks him and envelopes him. He stands there solid and motionless, as if he were Andromeda's monster, changed to a rock in the sea. Since his friends keep away from him, Darling sometimes takes Divine to the Roxy Bar. They play poker dice. Darling likes the elegant movement of shaking the dice. He also likes the graceful way in which fingers roll a cigarette or remove the cap of a fountain pen. He gives no thought to either his seconds or his minutes or his hours. His life is an underground heaven thronged with barmen, pimps, queers, ladies of the night, and queens of spades. But his life is a heaven. He is a voluptuary. He knows all the cafes in Paris where the toilets have seats. To do a good job, he says, I've got to be sitting down. He walks for miles, preciously carrying in his bowels the desire to shit, which he will gravely deposit in the mauve-tiled toilets of the Café Terminus at the Saint-Lazare station. I don't know much about his background. Divine once told me his name. It was supposed to be Paul Garcia. He was probably born in one of those neighborhoods that smell of the excrement which people wrap in newspapers and drop from their windows, at each of which hangs a heart of lilacs. Darling. If he shakes his curly head, you can see the earrings swinging at the cheeks of his predecessors, the prowlers of the boulevards who used to wear them in the old days. His way of kicking forward to swing the bottoms of his trousers is the counterpart of the way women used to kick aside the flounces of their gowns with their heels when they waltzed. So the couple lived undisturbed. From the bottom of the stairs, the concierge watches over their happiness, and toward the evening, the angels sweep the room and tidy up. To Divine, angels are gestures that are made without her. Oh, I so love to talk about them. Legions of soldiers wearing coarse sky blue or river-colored denim are hammering the azure of the heavens with their hobnailed boots. The plains are weeping. The whole world is dying of panicky fright. 5 million young men of all tongues will die by the cannon that erects and discharges. Their flesh is already embalming the humans who drop like flies. As the flesh perishes, solemnity issues forth from it. But where I am, I can muse in comfort on the lovely dead of yesterday, today, and tomorrow. I dream of the lover's garret. The first serious quarrel has taken place, which ends in a gesture of love. Divine has told me the following about Darling. When he awoke one evening, too weary to open his eyes, he heard her fussing about in the garret. "What are you doing?" he asked. Divine's mother, Ernestine, who called the wash basin, used to do the wash basin every Saturday, so Divine answers, "I'm doing the wash basin." Now, as there was no bathtub in Darling's home, he used to be dipped into a wash basin. Today, or some other day, though it seems to me today While he was sleeping, he dreamed that he was entering a wash basin. He isn't, of course, able to analyze himself, nor would he dream of trying to. But he is sensitive to the tricks of fate and to the tricks of the theater of fear. When Divine answers, "I'm doing the wash basin," he thinks she is saying it to mean, "I'm playing at being the wash basin," as if she were doing a role. She might have said, "I'm doing a locomotive." He suddenly gets an erection from the feeling that he has penetrated Divine in a dream. In his dream, he penetrates the Divine of the dream of Divine, and he possesses her, as it were, in a spiritual debauch. And the following phrases come into his mind: to the heart, to the hilt, right to the balls, right in the throat. Darling has fallen in love. I should like to play at inventing the ways love has of surprising people. It enters like Jesus into the heart of the impetuous. It also comes slyly, like a thief. A gangster here in prison related to me a kind of counterpart of the famous comparison in which the two rivals come to know Eros. How I started getting a crush on him? We were in the jug. At night, we had to undress, even take off our shirts in front of the guard to show him we weren't hiding anything, ropes, files, or blades. So, the little guy and me were both naked. So, I took a squint at him to see if he had muscles like he said. I didn't have time to get a good look because it was freezing. He got dressed again quick. I just had time to see that he was pretty great. Man, did I get an eyeful. A shower of roses. I was hooked, I swear. I got mine. Here, one expects, inescapably, I knocked myself out. It lasted a while. 4 or 5 days. The rest is of no further interest to us. Love makes use of the worst traps, the least noble, the rarest. It exploits coincidence. Was it not enough for a kid to stick his 2 fingers in his mouth and loose a strident whistle just when my soul was stretched to the limit, needing only this stridency to be torn from top to bottom? Was that the right moment, the moment that made 2 creatures love each other to the very blood? Thou art a sun unto my night is a sun unto thine. We beat our brows, standing, and from afar my body passes through thine, and thine from afar through mine. We create the world, everything changes, and to know that it does. Loving each other, like 2 young boxers who before separating tear off each other's shirt, and when they are naked, astounded by their beauty, think they are seeing themselves in a mirror, stand there for a second open-mouthed, shake with rage at being caught, shake their tangled hair, smile a damp smile, and embrace each other like 2 wrestlers in Greco-Roman wrestling, interlock their muscles in the precise connections offered by the muscles of the other, and drop to the mat until their warm sperm, spurting high, maps out on the sky a Milky Way where other constellations which I can read take shape. The constellations of the sailor, the boxer, the cyclist, the fiddle, the spy, the dagger. Thus, a new map of the heavens is outlined on the wall of Divine's garret. Divine returns home from a walk to Monceau Park. A cherry branch, supported by the full flight of the pink flowers, surges stiff and black from a vase. Divine is hurt. In the country, the peasants taught her to respect fruit trees and not to regard them as ornaments. She will never again be able to admire them. The broken branch shocks her, as you would be shocked by the murder of a nubile maiden. She tells Darling how sad it makes her, and he gives her a horse laugh. He, the big city child, makes fun of her peasant scruples. Divine, in order to complete to consummate the sacrilege, and in a way to surmount it by willing it, perhaps also out of exasperation, tears the flowers to shreds, slaps, shrieks, in short, a love riot. For let her touch a male, and all her gestures of defense modulate into caresses. A fist that began as a blow opens, alights, and slides into gentleness. The big male is much too strong for those weak queens. All Sek Gorgi had to do was to rub lightly, without seeming to touch it, the lump his enormous tool made beneath his trousers, and none of them were henceforth able to tear themselves away from him, who, in spite of himself, drew them straight home as a magnet attracts iron filings. Divine would be fairly strong physically, but she fears the movements of the riposte, away from the facial and bodily grimaces that effort requires. She did have the sense of modesty, and also a modesty about masculine epithets, as they applied to her. As for slang, Divine did not use it, any more than did her cronies, the other Nellies. It would have upset her as much as whistling with her tongue and teeth like some cheap hood, or putting her hands in her trouser pockets and keeping them there, especially by pushing back the flaps of her unbuttoned jacket, or taking hold of her belt and hitching up her trousers with a jerk of the hips. The queens on high had their own special language. Slang was for men. It was the male tongue. Like the language of men among the Caribbees, it became a secondary sexual attribute. It was like the colored plumage of male birds, like the multicolored silk garments which are the prerogative of the warriors of the tribe. It was a crest and spurs. Everyone could understand it, but the only ones who could speak it were the men who at birth received as a gift the gestures, the carriage of the hips, legs and arms, the eyes, the chest, with which one can speak it. One day, at one of our bars, when Mimosa ventured the following words in the course of a sentence, his screwy stories, the men frowned. Someone said with a threat in his voice, "Broad, acting tough." Slang in the mouths of their men disturbed the queens, although they were less disturbed by the made-up words peculiar to that language than by expressions from the ordinary world that were violated by the pimps, adapted by them to their mysterious needs. Expressions perverted, deformed, and tossed into the gutter and their beds. For example, they would say, "Easy does it," or "Go, thou art healed." This last phrase, plucked from the gospel, would emerge from lips at the corner of which was always stuck a crumb of tobacco. It was said with a drawl. It would conclude the account of a venture which had turned out well for them. "Go," the pimps would say. They would also say curtly, "Cut it," and also, "to lie low." But for Darling, the expression did not have the same meaning as for Gabriel, the soldier who is to come, who is already being announced by an expression which delights me and seems suitable only to him. "I'm running the show." Darling took it to mean, "You've got to keep your eyes open." Gabriel thought, "Better clear out." A while ago, in my cell, two pimps said, "We're making the pages." They meant they were going to make the beds, but a kind of luminous idea transformed me there, with my legs spread apart, into a husky guard, or palace groom who makes a palace page, just as a young man makes a chick. To hear this boasting made Divine swoon with pleasure, as when she disentangled, it seemed to her that she was unbuttoning a fly, that her hand, already inside, was pulling up the shirt. Certain pig Latin words from their extra syllables, edbe, olbe, this slang had insidiously dispatched its emissaries to the villages of France, and Ernestine had already yielded to its charms. She would say to herself, "A galoise, a butt, a drag." She would sprawl in her chair and murmur those words as she inhaled the thick smoke of her cigarette. The better to conceal her fantasy, she would lock herself up in her room and smoke. One evening, as she opened the door, she saw the glow of a cigarette at the far end of the darkness. She was terrified by it, as if she were being threatened by a gun. But the fright was short-lived and blended into hope. Vanquished by the hidden presence of the male, she took a few steps and collapsed in an easy chair. But at the same time, the glow disappeared. No sooner had she entered than she realized she was seeing in the mirror of the wardrobe opposite the door, isolated by the darkness from the rest of the image, the glow of the cigarette she had lit. And she was glad that she had struck the match in the dark hallway. Her true honeymoon might be said to have taken place that evening. Her husband was a synthesis of all men, a butt. A cigarette was later to play her a shabby trick. As she walked down the main street of the village, she passed a young tough, one of those 20 faces I have cut out of the magazine. He was whistling. A cigarette was stuck in the corner of his little mug. When he came abreast of Ernestine, he lowered his head, and the nodding gesture made him look as if he were ogling her, tenderly. Ernestine thought he was looking at her with impertinent interest, but the fact is he was going against the wind, which blew the smoke into his eyes and made them smart, thus causing him to make this gesture. He screwed up his eyes and twisted his mouth, and the expression passed for a smile. Ernestine drew herself up with a sudden movement, which she quickly repressed and sheathed. And that was the end of the adventure, for at that very moment the village hood, who had not even seen Ernestine, felt the corner of his mouth smiling and his eye winking. With a tough guy gesture, he hitched up his pants, thereby showing what the position of his true head made of him. Still, other expressions excited her. Just as you would be moved and disturbed by the odd coupling of certain words, such as bell and candle, or better still, a Tartar ball hold, which she would have liked to whistle and dance to the air of a Java. Thinking of her pocket, she would say to herself, "My pouch." While visiting a friend, "Get a load of that. She got the works." About a good-looking passer-by, "I gave him a hard-on." Don't think that Divine took after her in being thrilled by slang, for Ernestine was never caught using it. To get damned sore, coming from the cute mouth of an urchin, was enough to make both mother and son regard the one who said it as a sulking little mug, slightly husky, with the crushed face of a bulldog, that of the young English boxer Crane, who is one of my 20 on the wall. Darling was growing pale. He knocked out a pink-cheeked Dutchman to rob him. At the moment, his pocket is full of florins. The garret knows the sober joy that comes from security. Divine and Darling sleep at night. During the day, they sit around naked and eat snacks. They squabble, forget to make love, turn on the radio, which drools on, and smoke. Darling says shit, and Divine, in order to be neighborly, even more neighborly than St. Catherine of Siena, who passed the night in the cell of a man condemned to death, on whose prick her head rested, reads Detective Magazine. Outside, the wind is blowing. The garret is cozily heated by a system of electric radiators, and I should like to give a short respite, even a bit of happiness, to the ideal couple. The window is open on the cemetery. 5 a.m. Divine hears church bells ringing, for she is awake. Instead of notes which fly away, the chimes are strokes, 5 strokes, which drop to the pavement. And on that wet pavement bear Divine with them, Divine, who 3 years before, or perhaps 4, at the same hour, in the streets of a small town, was rummaging through a garbage can for bread. She had spent the night wandering through the streets in the drizzling rain, hugging the walls so as to get less wet, waiting for the Angelus. The bells are now ringing low mass, and Divine relives the anguish of the days without shelter, the days of the bells, which announces that the churches are open to old maids, real sinners, and tramps.